This is Dune Talk, a DuneNewsNet.com production. Join us now for the latest Dune news, reactions, and lively discussions.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Dune Talk. This is the official show of DuneNewsNet.com, where we cover everything happening in the universe of Dune, whether it's the movies, books, games, or future TV shows. Last show we discussed the highlights from the Dune Part 2 official trailer, but there's still so much to explore. This is Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com, and today I'm looking forward to doing a scene-by-scene breakdown with the Dune Talk crew.
Hey everybody, it's Garin. It's good to be back. Really enjoyed our last podcast, just being able to talk about this trailer. Now we're going to go deep into it, and I've actually done my homework, so I have some stuff to share today.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us once again. Great episode last week. Thank you for all the support, tuning in for that one, giving us some feedback and comments. Happy to hear everyone's opinions and thoughts on the trailer, and really excited to take a deeper dive here with everyone.
Hey, Simon here. Like Johnny said, last week was a lot of fun. 2 weeks in a row, boys. Back to normal, as normal as we can be. Also, thank you to the person that says I look like Gurney. I know I need a haircut and a beard trim, but that's as far as I get with Gurney.
Dune movie news.
Okay, so before we dive in, please note that we're going in depth into the context of some of these scenes, and there will be spoilers for events in the Dune novel. The trailer opens with a special moment between Chani and Paul. They're sitting out there on the sand dunes. This appears to be taking place, I would say, relatively early on in the film, before the Sandworm ride, likely. Paul's eyes are not yet that blue and blue that we see later on in the trailer, and they're growing closer to each other. There's a feeling of playfulness. War and worries are still feeling really distant. So looking at the scene, similar to the opening of in Caladan when we had in Dune Part 1, where we get to see that breakfast with Paul and Jessica, we get to see the ceremony, it feels that this will be one of those scenes that expands on elements from the book. So like going back to the book, you had the funeral of Jamis, and then Chani says to Paul, tell me about the waters of your birth world, Paul Muad'Dib. But Paul answers, another time, Chani, I promise. So this is, maybe that scene that happened off screen in the book that we're getting to see now. So it's really good to see that director Denis Villeneuve is keeping room for these types of quieter scenes to develop the characters. Like in the recent interview, he said about Chani and Paul, the most important thing is that spark, that relationship. If we don't capture that, there's no movie. The epicenter of the story is this relationship. Then we get the logos, and then we briefly see Lady Jessica in a protective shelter with Fremen around her. They're on top of a sandworm traveling across the desert. So going by her facial tattoos, this is after she's taken the water of life and become a reverend mother. She's now a greatly respected religious leader of the Fremen, in addition to being the mother of the one who they believe is their prophet. So basically, she's a very important person. They're looking to protect her, keeping her safe from the sun and the elements. Then as that scene fades, we hear the narration of Princess Irulan begin.
Marcus, by the way, I think that scene with Paul and Chani might be right before the Sandworm riding. That's just my opinion. But as we continue on the trailer, Irulan talks about the fall of House Atreides, which is great because it also reminds people that may have only seen the movie once that Paul's house, royal house, was completely destroyed, and also the Irulan stuff reminds me very much of the opening chapter of every chapter in Dune. Jessica and Paul are talking also as the question is, what if Paul Atreides is still alive? And that shot where he's just walking out of the desert, kind of out of focus, is probably one of my favorite shots as I was thinking about it. Also, we get a fast glimpse at Bernie Halleck, which I have a love-hate relationship because I feel like that should have been a surprise. But also, his name is on the poster. So obviously we know Josh Brolin's back, and there was a Vanity Fair picture of him. So, but quick little image of, Pirate Gurney.
Yeah, and they're certainly not keeping that a secret, right? Because they even had in the comics books the Water of Conley, where you get to see the story of how after the fall of Arrakis, Gurney actually joined the smugglers, and he was with them for 2 years, like seeking to get revenge on the Harkonnens.
At 40 seconds into the trailer, you've got this really dark, almost plain black image, and then it's opening up, and this is the gladiator fight between Feyd. This is on Giedi Prime, and this is the moment where we actually see the fight between him and the gladiator. This is on his birthday. It's a celebration on Giedi Prime in the capital city of Harco. And what I really like about what Villeneuve has done with the design of Feyd is it's accurate to the book, where he's got both knives in either hand, but he's got the shaved head, he's got the light skin, he's matching the Harkonnen design that was established in part 1, and it's even in black and white. At least that's how it appears in the trailer. So, on a planet like Giedi Prime, there just isn't a lot of color, and so I think it's just emphasizing that design element. Just really excited to see the further detail of that gladiator scene, because that scene has a lot of intrigue and complexity going on behind the scenes as we're seeing Feyd fight this gladiator who is supposed to be drugged typically, so that it's kind of an easy kill, but it's more complicated this time. There's some plans within plans going on behind the scenes. So this is an exciting moment that I'm glad we're getting a glimpse of. The next scene, or the next image, is kind of unique, because in part 1, when we see those images of Arrakis and the sand dunes going off into the distance, it's more of a tan, sort of natural color to the dunes and the sand. And what we have here, I couldn't help but think back to David Lynch's '84 film, because a lot of times in that original film, the sky was kind of an orangey color. There was sort of an orange hue at certain moments of that original film, and this almost felt like kind of an homage to that, in kind of a nerdy way. I went and just searched the original Dune book, and I looked for the word orange. And orange obviously is mentioned a lot in the book because of the Orange Catholic Bible, but there isn't a lot of description of the sky or the planet itself being orange. But I'm kind of interested to see kind of this contrast. Johnny was talking about this, I think, last week, where we kind of have this black and white contrast with these really bright colors that we didn't get in part 1, which is more of a similar color palette going throughout. I really like the next shot, which is, I want to believe it's an ornithopter, and there's some sort of a machine gun mounted on the side shooting. It doesn't appear to be a laser gun. It appears to actually be a gun shooting bullets or something of that nature. So excited about that. We have a really interesting image of Lady Margot Fenring, who, again, will play a really big role in that gladiator scene, because she and her husband are basically there on an errand for the emperor to kind of do some espionage, as it were. So I really like her dress, the dark black dress that she's in. She also has a very light skin tone, which is a little bit reminiscent of the Harkonnen facial design, but not sure that connection there. An image here where we see, I can't tell exactly who it is, but it looks like they're entering a sietch or a water cairn where they're going to see the water in the sietches, which is something that we know is they are storing large amounts of water underneath the surface of Arrakis, and that appears to be what that is. And then we see a quick image of the water of life. Someone is actually holding the water of life, which we know to be the essence from the inside of a sandworm. And she will actually, Lady Jessica will actually drink that. And that's the process that she goes through to then become a Reverend Mother. And so we see a glimpse of that. We also see Paul, again, this orange design. I'm not sure what this connection is going to be, but an orange design of Paul fighting on the desert. I could be dead wrong, you guys, but it almost looked a little bit like maybe this could be, Sardaukar, or that's not the Sardaukar uniform, but it's a design that kind of the helmet and there's not a lot of movement in the head. I couldn't quite figure out who this is. I'm sure you guys have some ideas, but clearly Paul is very adept at fighting. His movements are really crisp and he's really commanding with his weapon. And again, that orange design, which I'm really kind of liking.
Yeah, real quick, Garin, to your point, that was something rewatching the trailer the first dozen times that I watched it. I was also very bewildered by the design of the suits that Paul was fighting those two soldiers in. And it seemed familiar, but then it was also very different from certain designs that we had seen, especially not really reminiscent of the Sardaukar. It just doesn't have the same shape. It's more bulbous. And going back, the only place it appears and what gives it away is who this is in the opening prologue of part 1. Harkonnen soldiers that are guarding the spice harvesters that have the cloaks and like the capes on. Oh, yeah. They have the bulbous rounded domed helmet. And they have capes on, so you can't really see their backs or their shoulders, but it is that same design. And actually later on in the trailer, I think one of us will be touching on this shot in particular. You see a group of these soldiers standing in a room, and you can get a little bit clearer vision of them. And from the front, especially holding their rifles, they match up perfectly with those Harkonnen soldiers in part 1.
The more I thought about the colors this past week, visions, who knows?
It is possible. It is possible.
Black and white can be visions. The blood orange could be a vision. I mean, let's not forget there was a whole range of color palette in the last movie with Paul's visions.
Yeah, you know what, Simon, you might really be onto something there, because the way Villeneuve does that light refraction on the images when Paul's having those visions, that color kind of matches that orange. So you might be onto something there.
And it would be weird to not have visions when they were such a big part of the first film. If they cut out the visions, I know personally I would be disappointed in that, because it is crucial.
I definitely could see it being visions, because as you just mentioned and we've discussed in the past, color was used pretty precisely in part 1 to highlight those more like extraordinary vision sequences. My one thing that it could be that the counterpoint that I can think of is the few shots that we get in the trailer that have that bright orange hue. They seem like just normal. It seems like a normal sequence. It doesn't stand out as like framed or shot in the same way that the visions in part 1 were. Even in part 1, if you remember, it wasn't consistent all the way through, but a lot of the time the visions were played out. And again, this is all being edited, so it could change. They could be tricking us. But a lot of times the visions were played out in slow motion, or the speed was tampered with in some way. In this little scrum that we have with Paul and these two Harkonnen soldiers, it plays out like you would expect a real fight. It goes at full speed, just like everything else in the trailer. And even the shot that's my background right now that I chose, it's just a shot that's pushing in. Like Garin mentioned, you get plenty of shots like that in part 1 as they're flying on ornithopters and things like that. And it doesn't really stand out as anything really kind of that you would expect in a vision. I mean, Paul fighting two Harkonnen soldiers on a dune isn't really an extraordinary moment. I mean, you would kind of expect that to happen. So it could be a vision, and I think maybe more likely than not, but I am very curious. I can't really think of another explanation for the color, honestly. However, that could be, I'm just going to throw out a wild theory here. There's really no grounds for it, or maybe you geniuses that know the book much better than I do will remind me of something that I've forgotten. A theory that I have is that what is a phenomenon that has been referenced and brought up during part 1, during the first trailer. It's been used in the imagery from the film, posters and the logo. There's this recurrence of an eclipse image or some sort of natural phenomenon occurring at some point. And again, I don't know if there's any basis. I don't believe there's any basis in the book for it, but I wonder if somehow there's going to be some sort of, I guess you could almost call it like a supernatural or some sort of, it's not quite rain falling at the end of Lynch's film, but I wonder if somehow there could be something with, and even in there's a shot in the trailer later on that we might reference, but you see the bright orange of the sun and then the two moons coming in front of it. So I'm wondering if there's something there that might be some sort of climactic or, kind of midpoint of the film where an eclipse could cause the atmosphere, the sky and the environment to change. And that's kind of some big demarcation within the story. That's just a wild theory of my own. Might just be a vision, might be some creative expressionist, feeling that Villeneuve is going for, but I just really like the aesthetic of it. Like you've all pointed out, it's definitely a nostalgic kind of feel to it. So I'm really excited to just see how that's implemented. I'm sure it just won't be those few shots. Could be a whole portion of the movie for all we know.
What if it's an eclipse vision? And let's not forget, in the first trailer that we ever had, they did play a version of Pink Floyd's Eclipse.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You're spot on there. So yeah, very, very interesting. But yeah, Garin, I totally agree. I think that's going to be a really intriguing part of the movie, at least from a visual standpoint, if it doesn't mean anything for the story necessarily. And so kind of moving into the next section of the trailer, we get a brief shot of Feyd. We already touched on his introduction in the trailer. This is kind of the other key shot that we get of him in the arena that's a close-up, like tight on his face. And it's him just kind of like letting out like a kind of almost barbaric kind of scream at this point. And it's right before we cut to a transition in the trailer. But before we get to that, just the shot itself, I think it's intriguing because it's for a couple of reasons. The one thing that I didn't notice until much later when I was kind of, again, kind of filing through the different shots is if you see in the far back left background, and then it just right over the shoulder of Feyd to the right of the frame, there's these two pitch black figures with these like arced, almost horned hats or helmets, and they're flanking Feyd. You see them in other shots of the arena where they're kind of in the far distant background. I don't know if these are almost like, in the old gladiator arenas, I guess they would have, people basically manning the arena to facilitate the gladiator fights and things like that. I don't know if they're supposed to be looking out for Feyd, or if they're supposed to be assisting him, or what's going on with that. But just the designs and the silhouettes of these characters are incredible. Again, I've mentioned this on my Twitter, like just the designs and the kind of style that Villeneuve is using with some of these characters is really intriguing. From the colors that we were just talking about, from the black and white, the orange, and now these costumes here. Again, we don't have a very clear image of them, but they're very striking in just their body shape and the silhouette that we get. So I thought that was one of the more interesting, but kind of under maybe seen parts of the trailer. And then for Feyd himself, just real quick, he is, again, he seems like a psychotic, almost what's the word I'm looking for, like feral kind of fighter. And one of my questions that we're not going to be able to figure out for a while, to come until we get more footage of Feyd is this really Feyd, how he acts, or is this some sort of performative, a persona that he's using in the arena? Because we'll talk about Feyd. He shows up a little bit later in the trailer, a couple later shots that are a totally different vibe that we get from Feyd later on, and even his appearance seems to be a little bit different. So I'm wondering, is he someone that's just, as Villeneuve described him, a psychotic Mick Jagger? Is he just someone who can flip a switch and go from being feral and animalistic to being more suave or calm in that way? Maybe that's what it is. Or is it even more deep where, like I said, he is putting on almost like a persona that he is this, just brute, almost like Raban is, but in a more, I guess, charismatic or almost suave kind of a way. Just because it is very interesting, and you can see it in other parts of the clip, but it's so in your face. And compare his look in this shot where he's screaming to the close-up of him when he walks out into the arena, when it's just the close-up, he's completely still and no one can see him yet, though the doors are opening. So I'm just wondering, I think that could be a pretty interesting way to approach the character, and it wouldn't be totally different from the text, really, I think, in some ways. So very cool there. And then getting into one of the centerpiece, really the centerpiece of the entire trailer, we were transitioned into it from a quick cut from Feyd to a close-up of Lady Jessica. She tilts her head back and her eyes pop open, and surprise, they're blue. So I thought, and I love the sound design in this part of the trailer too. It just quickly cuts. It's very intense and it's ratcheting up, and then it just goes silent. And that silence leads us into the worm riding sequence. And just kind of quickly going through this, it's the thumper. We're all familiar with that. They're kind of invoking that, familiar prop from the first movie, and people are going to immediately kind of know what that means and what they're doing, putting that into the sand. I really love in this sequence, something that I highlighted in my analysis, or kind of what I've been talking about on Twitter, is immediately Villeneuve, again, sandworm riding. It's something we talked about last episode quite a bit. How do you make that realistic, or how do you make it grounded? And when I say that, it's not like, oh, like it's a real thing that would happen in reality, but just something you can latch onto and like be in the shoes of the character as you're seeing it, or as it's happening with Paul. And one of the great things that Villeneuve does, and Fraser does, Greg Fraser, the cinematographer, and they did this a lot. I mean, they do this all the time. Villeneuve did it in 2049. He did it in part one. But there are shots where, for example, you have Chani, her back of her head is on the left side of the frame, and then in shallow focus, and in the distance, the entire rest of the frame is taken up by the dune and Paul standing on top of it. So you just immediately understand the scale, the distance, and you have an idea of how big the dune is, how far away Paul is from Chani. And it's like we're spectators, just like Chani and the Fremen are, seeing Paul kind of take on this challenge. And then we also get, from a distance, we get those. And then the contrast is we have these closer, intimate shots that are close-ups on Paul's face, or were over his shoulder, or right against his body. I thought that was really nice. And those quick shots are kind of intercut with this dialogue between Paul and Stilgar, as Stilgar kind of I guess you could say, cautions him to not try and show off, don't impress anyone. And that is, from my understanding, I don't remember it myself, but I've seen people say that's dialogue essentially straight from the book. So I thought that was pretty cool too. And you kind of understand that they already have this almost like a father-son relationship. You know, it's the same way that the Duke would kind of teach up Paul in certain moments, or that we saw interactions with them the first movie. So I thought that was great. And then, like I said, these shots of Paul, there's another shot similar to the Chani shot I mentioned earlier. Paul's back of his head, or the side of his head, is on one side of the frame, close to his shoulder. And in the distance, we see the open desert, and then the sand flying up as the worm approaches. Again, just giving a great sense of scale, size, and kind of the actual distance between the worm and Paul as it approaches. And then one of my other favorite shots of the trailer, a couple of them in quick succession, we have this epic long shot of the dune with Paul on top of it, and you can just see he looks so tiny up there as he like runs along, and we just see him like from behind, and kind of, like I said, at a distance. He's like hauling ass. And you just know, like, it's just ratcheting up the tension as like the sand kind of starts to sink in, and the worm, is getting closer and closer. But he's just running full speed along the dune, and then we get a quick shot behind him as he approaches the drop-in point, and the sand continues to churn. And then we follow him off the side of the dune and in as he drops in on top of the worm. And we kind of just stick with him all the way through. The sand's falling everywhere. There's like wind whipping. There's like atmospheric kind of like CG, like dust. It all just feels really like it's like textural, and like you feel like you're actually right in Paul's, like you can like taste the sand getting in your mouth. I just think it just gives a great kind of sense of the experience that Paul's having. And then cuts to, of course, he seems to be latching on. He gets on with one of his hooks, and then it cuts to Paul kind of chatting back to Stilgar, like, oh yeah, nothing fancy. And then of course he's climbed up on, we don't see him climbing the worm. We just cut to him being on top of the worm and him throwing the hook to grab onto like the scales and make sure that he's not going to fall off. And then he gets both hands on and kind of stands up straight. And of course the Fremen go crazy and are cheering. And we get another great shot that kind of pans across, which I think is great. To give you an idea. The cool thing about this is we don't see the worm in its entirety, clearly at least. It's all either so close up on Paul that we can't see the entire worm, or at this shot that's coming up here in the distance, the camera pans across the whole desert as the worm goes by. You can't see it. There's dust kicking up everywhere, but you can barely make it out. And the Fremen are all just standing either next to the camera or in front of the camera, and it's just going right across. So again, just reestablishing the scale and that perspective from the Fremen, like the crowd that's cheering Paul on. So I think there's been kind of different takes on this and how people feel about it. I think it was really great and smart that they included this scene in the trailer, because this is probably the first scene in the movie that we get of someone riding a worm. Probably. I mean, we got a very quick glimpse of someone riding at the end of part 1. That just clues the audience in on that they use worms for transportation and other things. They ride the worms. And so what's the next logical progression? Paul needs to get and learn how to ride a worm. So I think this is going to be kind of a fun scene, similar to, I know people maybe are not fans of this movie, but Avatar, which takes a lot of inspiration from Dune. But the scene where Jake Sully, he has to learn how to ride the banshees, and he climbs up the mountain and he gets all these different instructions from Neytiri and the other Na'vi, and then he has to learn how to hop on it and latch up its mouth and then take off. So I think it's going to be a really exhilarating sequence. And I think this is just, obviously it's quickly cut. It's just a taste of it. But it's certainly not spoiling anything or giving too much away as far as the other big worm scenes are concerned for later in the story. So I think it was just a great way to kind of center the trailer and also give you a better sense of the action and like the adventure kind of tone of the movie that we're going to get in some stretches, which is going to be pretty different, I think, from part 1 and what people kind of experienced with that.
Yeah, and then after that truly epic ride, we cut to one of Garen's favorite shots.
So, as with all due respect to how important sandworms will be in part 2 and how awesome they are, the world gave a collective sigh of relief when they saw not 1, not 2, but 11 ornithopters.
Did you actually count them?
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone is clear that this was do or die for me.
Did you actually count all 11 of them? Did you actually stop and like freeze frame it and go 1, 2, 3?
I may have done that, Simon. Yeah.
Hey, there might be even more off frame, Gary. Right, we don't know. It's an armada.
The ornithopter to me is like the second most important character in this film, and I was so relieved to see it. And of course, the ornithopters are going to be in the book. They do play a sort of minor role in all of the forthcoming battles that everyone is going to experience in this part 2. But I would like to believe that Villeneuve is actually going to incorporate them even more, just because of just the design is just so awesome. So it's a beautiful shot of these ornithopters going into the distance. I think that's actually shot in Jordan, but it's the Arrakis that we know from part 1, and it's just a gorgeous shot.
Quick question, Garin, for the ornithopter expert. I thought, when I first saw the shot and went back and I've rewatched it, of course, do you think, yes or no, do you think these are a new model or a new version of ornithopter? Because it does look slightly different. I mean, we're seeing it from behind, so it's hard to tell, but like there's like landing gear like hanging down or something from what I can see. And I don't remember that being on the ones in part 1.
Yeah, Johnny, you have a keen eye, my friend. I do think, though, if you remove that landing gear, or maybe they're even like rocket launchers, who knows what those are exactly. Yeah, it does have the same general design of at least the Harkonnen ornithopters that were chasing Paul and Jessica through the storm. From behind, it looks almost identical with that design, but you're right. There's something different about the landing gear or other ordnance that is attached to those.
Right,
so,
definitely.
Good observation. Now we get another shot, again in the black and white, of Giedi Prime, of Feyd fighting the gladiator again. It's just from a different angle. What I love about the beginning of this shot is you see how massive the gladiator arena is. The book doesn't actually give it gives the design being a triangle, but it doesn't actually give you a sense of how vast the stadium is. But the way Villeneuve has designed this, it's massive. It's bigger than any NFL stadium that I've ever seen. So it's really a beautiful design. We see, at least according to the book, the gladiator that he's fighting is taller than him. It appears to be that way in these brief shots. So we've got some accuracy of being true to the book there. And there's one thing that it does describe in the book, that as they begin fighting, Feyd puts a barb into his arm, and I couldn't see it as I just sort of stopped each frame, but maybe that happens a moment later in the image that we're seeing here. But I'm just, again, I love the intensity of the fighting. I think, I remember Austin Butler talking about how intensive his training was, and you can just see that's just the way the movement is, and the quick motions. It's really amazing. And remember, Feyd is the nemesis of Paul, right? Feyd was supposed to, he's continuing generations of bloodline genetic manipulation, so that he was supposed to marry and mate with Lady Jessica's daughter, that then would produce the Kwisatz Haderach. So we're going to see that Feyd is incredibly skilled, and his movements and his ability to control his body is just going to be well above the average person. And I think we get a glimpse of that intensity here in these scenes. And we see Lady Fenring, and she's kind of like she's got binoculars that she's holding up, kind of in a very like 18th century, 19th century kind of thing, where she's looking down into the gladiator arena so that she can see Feyd. And there, as you know, if you've read the book, there's a relationship going on there where even Feyd is almost flirting with Lady Fenring, and Lady Fenring is quite interested in him. But it might not be genuine. There's other things going on in the background there that I won't talk about, but there's a plan behind that. But you see her being very interested in watching Feyd.
There's always a plan, Garin.
It's never quite what it appears, right? So
yep.
There's a very quick image of what appears to be a Reverend Mother. I would like to believe this is actually Lady Jessica, because she has a very high kind of headdress and a veil over her face, and I see clearly Fremen in the background. So I'd like to believe that this is an image where Lady Jessica has now fully come into the role of a Reverend Mother for the Fremen. And then finally, I have a moment where Paul and Chani kiss, and this is something that was alluded to in Paul's visions in part 1. Paul was trying to figure out his visions. He hadn't quite learned how to interpret the visions he was receiving. Sometimes those images of Chani was loving him or appearing to be interested in him, and then suddenly she's pulling a knife out of him, and so he hadn't quite figured out how to discern, what his visions were and whether they were truthful or not. And yet here now we see in the trailer that in part 2, they really are in that relationship, that loving relationship where they will be married. And so seeing them kiss, I think, is important to be in the trailer, because we see them in the opening as Marcus described, but now we see that they have a full-blown relationship if they're actually kissing each other. So that's important to the story.
And then we have several quick shots They really go by in a flash, but these are very intriguing. First, we see Shishakli. She's kneeling on the ground. She's apparently been captured. As Johnny brought up earlier, these appear to be Harkonnen soldiers, but in the more distinctive armor suits. Some other details. On the ground next to her, there appear to be 2 Cielagos. So in the book, those are basically described as bats that the Fremen use for communication. They do look a bit more like birds here, but in any case, this indicates that the Fremen were trying to get a message out, but that this trance was intercepted and the Harkonnens were able to take control of the siege. So a couple of interesting things going on here, and this may be a scene that was mentioned in the book or something original. We'll get into that in a moment. And then we have a quick shot of Princess Irulan. So here she's wearing a full metal headdress, and it seems like she's armored up, likely to being somewhere dangerous. That's definitely not in the book, and there are a couple of theories to bring up here. First, at the beginning of the trailer, she's questioning, what if Paul Atreides is still alive, right? Well, what if she's investigating that personally by going to Arrakis undercover? We didn't see that in the first film, but maybe now we'll get to see a disguised Sardaukar, like wearing those Harkonnen armors. In any case, Irulan would be seeking out whether there's any truth to those rumors of Muad'Dib and the connections there. Another possibility, what if, similar to the Dune miniseries that was released in 2000, she could be joining Lady Margot on a trip to Giedi Prime and maybe trying to obtain some intel behind the scenes there. Then there's that beautiful shot of the Arrakis 2 moons in front of that fiery orange sun, and I think that lends credits to the theory that we're going to get some sort of eclipse.
Hey, those moons are moving, Marcus. They're moving quick.
Yeah, and we had some interesting discussion in the comments, and one of the points was about that we have, when we see the scenes with Feyd, it's like all black, devoid of color, and then when we see the scenes with Paul, it's like that bright orange, like really colorful, like showing that they're like the opposition to each other. And at least for the trailer, that seems to be the case, right? Because like in all these scenes with Feyd, it's really dark. And then when we see Paul in certain these scenes, either in the background or like when he's fighting the orange background. So, and then like as we'll get to later, that seems to come together at the end as well. Then we see Feyd and Margot, and as Garin was alluding to, the Bene Gesserit have plans here, right? Because Paul was potentially going to be the Kwisatz Haderach, because Lady Jessica had gone against the wishes of the Bene Gesserit and given Duke Leto a son. But then now that he's out of the picture, the Bene Gesserit have to continue their plan, right? So they're going back to that original route and looking for another path forward. So it's basically, so Margot, plainly, she plans to get impregnated by Feyd so that they can continue that path and realize the Kwisatz Haderach. Then we have another scene that could be several things. So it's Chani, she's looking really anxiously out in the desert. Maybe she's received worrying news. Could she be hearing news of Paul, like who's taking the water of life and he's in the coma? So maybe she's hearing about that and she's very worried about him. The other thing I'm thinking of here, what if she's heard about an attack in the siege where her son is? Right, because they had the child, which is Leto the First. Yeah. We said it's all books spoilers. So yeah, what if that's the case here? So she's learning about it, and I'm expecting that Villeneuve is going to keep that scene. I mean, I really hope so. With someone like Zendaya, who's won the Emmy Awards for roles like with really emotional roles and a lot of drama, I can really imagine her bring that scene to life on screen. Where in the book it was just a few lines and we didn't get much emotion about that.
So Marcus, I really love your Detective Irulan theory that she's going to go see maybe on Arrakis and find out if Paul Atreides is still alive. And I really hope that they keep the Leto the First storyline. I didn't want to talk about it before, but since you opened the bag, it is so crucial for so many reasons. Just for this movie, for Paul's motivation also. You think he's pissed now? Just wait. And it's also so important when Leo II is born. It is so crucial, and I really hope that the studios let Denis really put that scene in there. And as heartbreaking as it should be, we should all be crying at that moment and really feel what Paul and Chani, feel. And I didn't think about her reacting to Leto the First, finding out what's going on with that.
Going back to that scene with Shishakli, I'm thinking, the trailer makes it seem like it's related to Irulan, the way it cuts, but it could be, that they're just, it's trailer deception. I'm thinking if it's not related to that, it could be that Shishakli was one of the Fremen who was defending Leto, and that's one of the moments. So, but yeah. A lot of possibilities in just these quick shots. So I like that they gave us just a quick shot so that we could think of the possibilities based on what we know from the book. But there's still so much unknowns here.
Just one theory on Shishakli's shot there where she's being captured by the Harkonnens. Johnny, you're exactly right. In fact, standing behind Shishakli are those Harkonnen bulbous, kind of helmet costumes. And so I think that's exactly right, that's who Paul is fighting in the scene that I talked about earlier, because there they are standing behind Shishakli in that image.
Moving to the next section here, just mention we get another shot of Paul riding a sandworm. Now what I will say here is that this is definitely not, this is my speculation, but I'll just say it. This is definitely not the earlier sequence that we saw. This is definitely not the same worm. So that's all I'll say about that. But it looks very, very cool. And looks great the way they have framed and kind of composed that shot there. So really excited about that. And then we get this really quick, interesting exchange between Lady Jessica and Paul. It's just a reverse shot of Jessica saying, we gave them something to hope for. And she is clearly full-blown Reverend Mother at this point. She has the headdress, her eyes are blue, she has the tattoos on her face, which again, I think great designs. I think, again, between costume design, hair and makeup designs, I think they've really gone to the next level, and really excited that, especially with the Fremen culture, they're really bringing that to life. And then with the next shot, we get Paul saying, that's not hope, and screaming it, actually. And from what I can see here, again, we're just taking a look at kind of a glance. It's hard to tell. I think we maybe discussed this slightly last week. It's hard to tell what, when rather, this is taking place, like what part of the movie it's in. Because with her being the Reverend Mother, it would have to be, I would think, halfway through or maybe in the second part of the movie. But Paul, and again, it's editing trickery. Maybe the effects aren't all completed. Hard to say. But it looks like his eyes aren't clearly blue in this image. It might be sometime between when she becomes Reverend Mother and when he decides to do some drastic things for himself. So that could be it. Or it also, the way it's edited and the way he appears in this shot and how it leads into the next few, we see after this back and forth, which in and of itself, I think the back and forth is fantastic and great to have in here, because it's, again, bringing to the surface, with all this excitement, with all the swashbuckling of riding the sandworms and these epic fight sequences, there's some really disturbing implications and interesting character work going on with Paul in particular, and Lady Jessica for that matter. But the following shot shows Paul wearing essentially the same outfit and looking pretty much like in the same condition. He goes up to the cliffside. And as he goes up to the cliffside, we see him from behind. We see his kind of cape billowing, and he walks up. And I love this shot because, again, it is in slow motion, which is interesting. I wonder if that's going to be the same way it's in the movie. I'm wondering, I'm just imagining, like, what's Hans Zimmer's score going to be like during the scene, and like, how is that going to transition into like whatever the next section is. But I think it's great because it's just him walking slowly. He has his knife out. And you just see it's in a shallow focus. You can't really see the details beyond the cliff, but you can see that there's thousands of figures standing on this rock formation and on the hillside, and there's like a cave behind them, or a sietch maybe. It cuts right into one of the last shots here it's a great shot. Nothing like I expected. I don't know, I would like to hear your guys' thoughts on that. This shot of the two, and when I say two, I'm talking about Paul and Feyd, of these two squaring off for their duel, I guess you could say here. Paul gets into his stance. He has his knife extended in front of him. Feyd, totally different stance. He's just standing like almost straight up. He has his knife down at his side. And he's, you can see this difference in stature and size and physicality between Austin Butler as Feyd and Chalamet as Paul, which I think it's really accentuated by the silhouette with the backlighting going on. I think that's great. And also the set design is really cool. I believe this might be part of like the Arrakis residence. It looks very similar to those sets we saw in part one. Could be something different, but you can see there's the same brutalist architecture. There's kind of overhanging, like blocked off parts of the ceiling, and then on each side you can see figures that are also in silhouette and very much dark. I'm sure maybe on the left Gurney could be standing over there, or maybe there's other characters, Fremen on the other side. But yeah, I think I just really liked, I don't know how I expected them to pull off this scene, or how it was going to be lit or framed or anything, but I really love the lighting. And we get this great line from Paul that he's kind of taking from Jamis in part one, where he says, "May thy knife chip and shatter," which is, I guess, kind of essentially this Fremen proverb that he says to Feyd before they kind of square off. And he does the same kind of salute with the Chris knife to his forehead, which we saw implicated. It's really interesting kind of thinking about it now in context, because it's not something that's in the books from my understanding. It's actually something that Jason Momoa decided to use because it meant something to him and his heritage, and then also his children, and he knew that if he did that in the movie that they would recognize that. And so I think it's just kind of cool that the guy that plays Duncan Idaho introduces this thing that's just personal to him, and then we see Paul pick it up within the context of the movie, and then he uses it later in part one, and now we're seeing it basically come to fruition here at the very end. So I just love everything. And even the way that Paul says that line, like, I don't know if they're doing something like augmenting his voice somehow or what's going on, but he just sounds so different. He's in full Muad'Dib mode, as Villeneuve might say. So I just really love that kind of glimpse of something that's a big scene, of course, for the overall story.
Yeah, he's probably using the voice, right?
He very well may be, right? Yeah.
That scene when he puts up the knife, I obviously thought of Duncan, and I was like, well, it makes sense because Duncan and Gurney trained Paul. So, it might be a salute also for respecting Duncan. What I want out of that scene is, if you're a fan of the 84 movie, I want Austin Butler to scream, "I will kill him." Very much like Sting did. Yeah,
Simon, is we don't want that to happen.
It's a gorgeous scene, and then finally we get full Paul Muad'Dib Atreides putting his knife up, saluting the Fremen soldiers, and then this is before the final battle. It's so amazing because as many time I've seen the 84 movie, and we have Kyle MacLachlan doing that scene, also they're underground. I love that. And this, what looks like they're out in the field. They're out on Arrakis. They're not somewhere hidden. And just the amount of soldiers, I'm thinking this has to be a CGI shot, but with the knee, you never know. But when I saw this scene, so many moons ago, I used to play hockey, and I had a CD man before iPods were a thing, and I had Iron Maiden on there, and there's a great Iron Maiden Dune song, and every time I heard that song, that's what I pictured. I pictured that scene just of Paul raising his knife and going like, "We're going to battles." It is Paul showing that he is the leader of these people. And it's great because it starts off slowly, kind of like this beautiful romantic scene with Paul and Chani, to this all out, oh, I better pay attention to this trailer and rewatch it because it's going to get serious and it's going to get dark. It's going to get messed up. Yeah, I mean, like I said last week, I love this trailer. And something I don't think we talked about last week. We talked about it off air, but someone noticed that there was a new Atreides flag in that scene. So it's interesting.
Just the contrast, and I think the storytelling in the trailer alone, the fact that it opens. I mean, we ended part one with Lady Jessica and Paul being taken in by the Fremen, him really meeting Chani and like forming this some sort of like initial bond, her smiling to him at the end, that sort of thing. And so the trailer basically picks up right where it left off. I mean, you're expecting him to be with Chani. People want to see Chalamet and Zendaya together, obviously, but you get this quaint, quiet little kind of almost flirty kind of romantic scene on this dune. It's just these two figures, Paul and Chani, who are pivotal to the story of Dune, of course, and they're just by themselves, and it's like perfect. It's tranquil. They're out there in the desert, and then all these crazy things happen in the trailer. You see all sorts of drama and action, and what does it cap the trailer off with? It caps it off with Paul by himself above all the Fremen, raising his knife, rallying them, and it just kind of has its own little arc and story in it. And I think that, again, even from that bookend of that shot, first one to the last one, is just a nice little summation of kind of what Dune is all about. And for good or for bad, I would say, for the Fremen and Paul, I think it's a great way to kind of close it off and get people excited, I think, to see this.
Yeah, and that final shot is basically the beginning of the jihad, right? There's so much that's going to come out of that. Yeah, and one thing about Johnny, you were mentioning like the scene with Paul and Jessica, that's likely towards the latter half of the movie, and yeah, I really like how they're exploring that, because Paul and Jessica, they have like such a complicated relationship. Like if you read the book, so of course mother and son they really care about, but at the same time they're enemies. Like I was just pulling up one of the quotes from the book that Paul says, "My mother is my enemy. She does not know it, but she is. She is bringing the jihad. She bore me. She trained me. She is my enemy." So like seeing how he explores that further, that's going to be really interesting.
I've been going back and rereading the second half of the book, and I just read that line the other night, and it's so important that everyone's like, "Oh, Paul brought this on." He did, but he was kind of forced to bring it on because of Lady Jessica. I think deep inside, Paul didn't want to do it, but he knew he had to do it for the greater good. And then we'll get into a golden path in like 3 books, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, no, that's funny, Simon. I'm glad you pointed that out. The last thing I just, again, kind of struck me is that I'm thinking of how Villeneuve as a filmmaker and storyteller, and how he can be subversive and surprising, and everything that Dune kind of represents. I think it'll be really interesting, because in a typical action adventure war movie, and he's described this as an action-packed kind of war movie, which I am very excited to see how he executes all of that, because he's never really done that before. But in these types of movies, Return of the King, maybe even the most recent Avatar, or the first Avatar, just these big movies where you have big action battles at the end. The last hour of the movie starts, they're rallying the troops, they're going into battle. Everyone in the audience is just stoked. They're ready to see the fight. They're rooting for the good guys to go ahead and win. I'm just imagining if Paul and Jessica are having this conversation, and Paul is just like, "No, this is terrible. Like this, I'm betraying. Like he's going down the wrong path, etc." And then he just goes and rallies these troops, and I'm just imagining the last hour playing out in the audience, just being like, "Oh God, like I actually don't really want to see this happen." Like what are going to be the consequences of this based on these images and these conversations between Paul and Jessica and et cetera. So it's going to be a really interesting vibe, I think, especially watching it the first time, and like with an audience that may not be familiar with Dune, seeing how Villeneuve might play with kind of the expectations and the tone of something where you're going into a big bloody battle, and why are you doing that, and what does that even mean? I think it's gonna be really, I can't wait. I think we all are obviously on the same page with that, but there's just so much to dive into with this trailer, obviously, as we've just spent a lot of time digesting, but really good points, I think, all around.
I wonder if one of the keywords on IMDb will be mommy issues to describe this movie. No, but you're right. Like, what are people's reaction going to be like? Like, are they going to look at Jessica as a villain? Maybe even.
I like that this trailer doesn't reveal those epic war scenes, those epic war battles, but it alludes to it with just these vast numbers of Fremen. And I can't remember where I heard this, but it is part of the book where Fremen don't sheath their knives until they're bloodied with their enemy's blood. And so you see these thousands of knives going into toward the sky, and that means that many Harkonnen and others are going to die. So this is really, there's a lot of death. There's going to be a lot of intensity here. But this is a pivotal part of the story and the character arc of Paul. So I really do, I'm going to be fascinated to see, like Johnny was saying, how does Villeneuve weave the epic battle action part of this story with what's really going on behind the scenes with Paul and other key characters. Because it's complex. It's not Star Wars. It's not clearly black and white. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how he pulls that off.
In the first movie, when we were on Giedi Prime, most of the scenes were indoors, right? It was basically, we met the Baron and Raban, and like there it was relatively normal color. But there's also the idea that because of Giedi Prime's sun, that it's can like remove the color so when Feyd is fighting in the daytime, that's the reason why it's black and white. So not necessarily because of visions, but just because of like he's in the bright daylight, but the sun is shining differently, like either because of the sun itself or something in the atmosphere. So that could be one of the reasons for that.
Yeah, I think Marcus, that's a great point, which I think we've kind of like alluded to, or other people have mentioned, but I think that's probably the most like accurate, probably going to be the most like true to what we actually see in the movie. I think people are just, and Garin, you mentioned that you weren't like the biggest fan of it because you described it as like jarring, like it is very different from everything else you see in the trailer. And I definitely understand that. Obviously, in the terms of the movie, when you're seeing a sequence that plays out over 10 minutes or something, if you show up on Giedi Prime and it's outdoors and that's just, you can see how it's lit and you understand. I think obviously Villeneuve, he's taking it up another level. He's trying to do something more dramatic with more style maybe than even the first one, which was obviously already very, technically incredible. But I think that, yeah, it makes sense based on, and he's always, especially with the Harkonnens and Giedi Prime, he's always been keyed in on like building the world in a way that makes sense, and environmentally speaking, especially when you can compare, we talk about environment, Arrakis versus Caladan versus Giedi Prime, trying to establish very different aesthetics and different visual cues. And that was something that even the costume designer Jacqueline West mentioned recently. She said there's really 3 key planets, and you want very different looks, and we really want to try to establish something different for all of them, and doing something where the way the sun is set up in the solar system and the way the environment, the atmosphere, it would make sense that it would just be very stark as far as the lighting and the exposure. And then they just choose to film it in a way that highlights that. And I think that's just could be a really interesting way. Could it be visions? Yes. Could it be something else? Potentially. But yeah, I think that makes sense. And that's just another thing that makes me really excited to see. Between that, the orange hues we got, which we still can't explain. And we haven't gotten any glimpses really, truly of the planet, the homeworld of House Carino yet. So I'm really excited to see what that aesthetic is going to look like. I would presume it's going to be very different from Arrakis or Giedi Prime. I think we have some notion of what it might be. So that'll be really cool. But that's just an example. We've talked about all the things in the trailer. a lot of things that are not in the trailer. Garin mentioned the last hour probably we're expecting with a lot of action and battles. No Emperor with Christopher Walken. They're saving that, which is great. No, again, his homeworld, House Carino's homeworld, not getting really any of that. And not getting any additional Atreides characters, let's say. So I think there's plenty to save for future trailers and the movie itself. So anyone worried about that, if you're not a book reader or is worried in that regard, definitely don't be, because it's gonna be packed. I'm very curious now watching the trailer and talking about it in depth. Like I think he mentioned, Villeneuve, that the movie would probably be comparable to the first one as far as the runtime, but I am wondering if there's any flexibility or if they've changed that at all, or if it's going to be about the same. The first movie was quite long. I mean, it was 2 hours 30-40 minutes. I could see this one being maybe 2:45 or something like that, but yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see how this all plays out, and as Garin said, having the action and the spectacle balanced with all the complexities of the story, which is only going to get more complex really from part one in this installment.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like we could just talk about this trailer for another hour or so easily, but yeah, we're gonna wrap it up for today. So yeah, let us know. Is there anything that that you think we missed? What are your theories in terms of the themes? What sort of those short scenes could mean? Let us know in the comments, and yeah, maybe we'll discuss that in more in upcoming episodes. So yeah, let's go ahead and sign off.
Simon here. You can follow me on socials at sdowdy, pretty much everywhere. I am a big fan of Christopher Walken, and one of my favorite Christopher Walken phrase ever is the word when he goes, "the Foo Fighters." So I can't wait until I hear him say "fighters" like he did on Saturday Night Live. If you want a good laugh, look up Dave Grohl doing his impression of Christopher Walken introducing the Foo Fighters.
Wow. Sensational. Yes, thank you all so much for watching once again, staying tuned. Please, yes, leave your thoughts below. Would love to hop in there and have a conversation, chat back about what you think about the trailer. It's Johnny Sobchak as always. You can find me on Twitter, Letterboxd, all that good stuff at Johnny Sobchak, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's Garin. You can follow me on Twitter at Dune Companion. Just excited to engage with all of you. Please ask us questions, give us feedback. We love talking about this, but we also really want to engage with all of you. So thanks for watching.
Yeah, and this is Marcus Gabriel, your editor at DuneNewsNet.com. You can find me writing there. Also follow our socials at Dune Newsnet on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, anywhere that you can find us. So yeah, it's been a great episode, guys. Looking forward to talking to everybody next week.
We hope you've enjoyed Dune Talk. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and add us to your social feeds. Be the first to hear breaking news and reviews.